Hello friends, I'm in Lewiston, Maine, USA at Potter's Field Cemetery. Potter's Field is a cemetery for people that are unknown or too poor basically to pay for their own burial, or maybe sometimes mass victims of diseases. But regardless, it's usually not a fancy cemetery at all. It's usually mass graves and it's city paid burials, so the absolute least expensive burials they could do and have somebody interred in the ground. Particularly, this is the final resting place of William Henry Pynn. You'll recognize him from previous videos that I've made. It really was my first big research case, and it kind of taught me how to do research. But his wife passed away when I was 11 years old in Holton, Maine, 1989. And I had tracked the history of their whole family, both his wife Lizzie's family and William's family. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out where William had gone after 1920. He does appear in the U.S. Census in Holton, Maine with his wife and her family in 1920. And after that, I had no idea. So his wife was arrested for lewd and lascivious behavior in Holton in 1923. She spent a year and a half in the women's prison in Skowhegan, and in 1925 she was actually moved to the Pownell State School in Gray, Maine, which is not far from here, a sanitarium. William did visit her at the sanitarium a few times. He actually worked the road crew in nearby Turner, Maine, and he was quite a bit older than Lizzie. Lizzie was born in 1902. William was born in 1889. So he was about 13 years older than she was. But he visited her in the state school a few times. And the reason she was in the state school is because they have no heirs. I am comfortable saying that I went to the state archives in Augusta, Maine. And normally vital records and archives aren't available until 72 years after a person's death. Lizzie only died in 1989, so about 36 years ago. But because I was in touch with her grandniece, the granddaughter of her brother Henry, I was able to view the records early. In viewing the records, it was thought that William had caught syphilis from Lizzie's mother, his mother-in-law, and he passed it on to Lizzie, which affected her mind. And so she was sort of unfairly put in the sanitarium while William walked free. But as the syphilis began to take hold of William, he got more and more sick. And eventually he ended up in the St. Mary's Hospital in March of 1926, 99 years ago. They tried to do surgery, but the cancer had spread from his liver to his gallbladder, so it was pretty well metastasized. And on March 19th of 1926, William passed away. Now again, William was a worker. He probably lived paycheck to paycheck. And when he passed away, he would have had little to no money. So they buried him here in the Potter's Field. I did come here last year and I tried to find a marker of some kind, even a temporary funeral home marker, which for folks that had no money at all, usually there was at least that temporary funeral home marker, which there's a few stones here. There's about 404 burials, according to the city clerk records, but there's only maybe 5 or 6 stones. So there certainly is no stone like this that says William Henry Pynn or anything similar on it. His name was frequently misspelled in his lifetime because William could neither read nor write, as we know from his immigration records. But this is what a temporary funeral home marker looks like, as opposed to an actual stone. These would often not be meant as a permanent marker. They would just have it there so the family would know where the person was buried and the undertaker would know. But over time, the spots where the dates would be and the spot where the name would be often are worn thin, like this one. You can see it says Teague and Stevens Funeral Home, but no other information. So I was hoping for at least something that said William Pynn on it, but there's nothing. And his name was spelled P-E-O-N-E or P-E-N-N. it should be P-Y-N-N. That's the actual original spelling of it. But again, he himself probably didn't know how his name was actually spelled, not knowing how to read or write, just the reality of it. So whatever clerk was making the document, whether it was the census or their marriage record, just wrote it down as it sounded. And of course, William would have had a deep Newfoundland accent, so sometimes it was spelled P-O-N or P-E-N-N, which is what his wife went by. In his military records, it's even spelled P-Y-I-N-N at one time. And then on another military document, P-E-N-N. So it's all over the place. But we don't know exactly where William is buried here, as there's no marker. But this is essentially a mass grave, as I mentioned before. So where we have a few markers here, this is probably part of the mass grave. And then going back farther, 404 people would take up a lot of space. So I imagine there's probably burials all the way through here. There is a lot of debris. People have camped here before because it is set apart from the other cemeteries. You do have the Grand Army Republic Cemetery that you have to drive through to get here, which is a tribute to veterans of different wars. And over there is the larger Riverside Cemetery, probably the largest in Lewiston. So I would love to go to the exact spot of William Henry Pynn's burial, but there's unfortunately no way of knowing exactly. But he's somewhere here for sure. I scoured city clerk records on the library website, and even the current clerk couldn't find it, but I found it buried in the records. It's spelled P-E-O-N-E, which is what it was on Find a Grave till I put in an edit request. And then when it says William P-E-O-N-E buried in Potter's Field, or City Grounds, as is often called, it also said C. William Penn, P-E-N-N, which to me confirms it's the same guy, especially because in the archives it said he died at St. Mary's Hospital in March 1926. Interestingly, in the city clerk records, it does say he died March 24th or 25th, can't remember exactly, but that's likely the date he was actually interred here. The actual death date was March 19th of 1926. I do have a copy of the death certificate that I got from the Lewiston town office. And it's kind of vague. It does have his wife's signature. And it says, father unknown, mother unknown. We do know that his father was Joseph Edward Pynn of Mosquito, and his mother was Sarah Workman or Worthman. But William had some unsavory characteristics to him, like we talked about earlier, where he caught syphilis from his mother-in-law. I talked to people that knew his wife in her later years when she stayed at the Kenny boarding home in Holton, Maine, and they said that William was very cruel to her. So we don't want to celebrate those characteristics, but it's also important to remember that William in some ways did epitomize the American spirit. He was an immigrant that came to the U.S. seeking a better life in the early 1900s, which would be about the time that people were flocking through Ellis Island and passing the Statue of Liberty, seeking a new life for themselves as well. He was a U.S. veteran, which I'm not sure how that works because he was never a naturalized citizen, but he was still drafted for World War I. He served as a coastal gunner at Cape Elizabeth in Fort Williams. So he did have some good characteristics to him as well. He was the oldest of about 12 children. But I believe in recording history as it was, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there were some not great things about William, but there were some good things about William too. He was the father of 4 children, all who died in infancy. And he did appear to support his wife till the end when he passed away. It's also interesting to note that Lizzie was still incredibly young when William passed away. If that happened in 1926, she was not yet 24 years old. He was about 37. So on top of the other problems she had, it couldn't have been easy to lose her husband at such a young age. And she went on to live till 1989. So she lived another 63 years past the time that William passed away. So quite an interesting life William led. And this is his final resting spot somewhere here in the Potter's Field at Lewiston, Maine, USA.